Do we have any former Roman Catholics in the room? 2, 3, 4. At the earlier service, when I asked that, we had about 20 folks. It's interesting in the Episcopal Church, if you ask the question, the same question really, how many former Roman Catholics do you have and how many former Baptists do you have, you'll generally get about the same number. We seem to be that middle ground, okay? We're the place that folks from sort of either extreme of liturgy and worship come together. It's good to be part of that middle ground. But there is also something valuable that we learn from those different opinions, those different denominations that come to us and can be found in the church. One of the great things is that we share so much with our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters around liturgy and worship, and also the work of the saints. Now, our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, or former Roman Catholics that are here, probably have heard of St. John Vianney. Then again, maybe not, okay? He is actually the patron saint of priests, okay? Trust me, if there was any group of people that really desperately needed a patron saint, it's priest. But it's kind of why he's the patron saint that's fascinating. He was not known for miraculous healings. He wasn't known for extraordinary oratory. He was known for pastoral care, providing for the people of his church. He grew up in France at the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century. He died around 1853, I believe. He lived through some very dynamic parts of French history. As a child, as a very young person, he actually lived through that part of the French Revolution where the Catholic Church essentially had to go underground with so much of its work and its teachings. So he didn't have the kind of education that he wanted. He had to learn in secret, being lectured by a parish priest. Eventually, though, with the rise of Napoleon, the church came a bit more back into the open and part of the society. But John was drafted for the Napoleonic Wars. However, he was also desperately ill, and so he didn't go off to fight. Over a bit of time, he actually healed. He was restored to health, and so he was drafted again. There's no real 4F at the time. If you could walk, talk, carry a bayonet and a gun, I mean, they sent you to war. So, though, like a great many other young men in France, rather than go to fight in Napoleon's war, particularly in Russia, he deserted. But unlike a lot of people who deserted, rather than just living in the wilderness and the woods and the mountainsides, he actually ended up in a very small village where he formed a school. And with what education he had, he began teaching the young people there. An extraordinary man. After Napoleon fell from power and the church was restored, he wanted to study for the priesthood. And that's what he did. But he had an interesting failing. He was terrible at Latin. The language of the church, the language of the Mass, the language of the dogma and the teachings. And he was terrible at Latin. He actually had to have sort of a special dispensation just to continue in his studies for the priesthood. But the thing that pushed him forward was his ability to care for others. Now, we're talking about at this point the early 1800s. Something that did not exist was counseling. Counseling. What did exist was confession. Reconciliation of a penitent. And he became known for the extraordinary amount of time that he would spend in confession. Sometimes 8 hours a day, hearing people's confessions and offering them words of comfort and hope and solace. sometimes 10 hours, 12 hours, even 16 hours. In fact, word of this extraordinary gift of care spread so that people, not just from nearby villages and towns, but throughout France and then throughout Europe, began flocking to see him in the tiny little village where he served. Now, the interesting thing about confession or reconciliation of a penitent is it's an opportunity not just to get things off of your chest, but to offer them up to God. And what Father John was known for being able to do was to draw out of people the deepest pain, the deepest hurt, and help them to offer it up to the only one who could offer not just solace, not just comfort, but also forgiveness and renewal. The ability to lay those problems, those issues into the hands of God and walk away cleansed, restored, renewed, made whole. Now let's hold that image of this devout person off to the side for a few minutes. And let's talk about our readings. Now last week, Mother Mia talked to us about the fact that we were in the middle of hearing 5 consecutive weeks of readings from James. The book of James, one of the most actually controversial books of the Bible. 5 weeks of readings from James. And today actually followed right after 5 weeks of reading from the Gospel according to John. Now, whenever you have that kind of repetition, there is a point that is trying to be made. With John, it was rather obvious. The point was the bread of life. So for 5 weeks, y'all heard sermons about the bread of life. Over and over and over again. Really what that means, though, it's not just that walk from manna in the wilderness to the body and blood of Christ. It's about God's grace as embodied in this sacrament. The grace of God, unconditional, unearned love that is available to us all. That's what those weeks were driving home over and over and over again. So what is it that we are receiving from James today? What is it that we received from James the week before and that we'll receive next week? Well, as I said, this is considered to be a bit of a controversial book of the Bible. Martin Luther. Do we have any former Lutherans in here today? A couple of former Lutherans. Martin Luther despised the book of James. Didn't want it to be in the Bible at all. Because he saw it as emphasizing works over faith. And you see, that's the age-old argument about James. However, if you'll read biblical scholars, if you'll look at the text itself, if you'll read Paul's letters about faith, and you'll read James' words about works, what you'll find is that they're talking essentially about the same thing. Okay, this is a question. Anybody in here breathe? Oh, please. Everybody in here breathes. Okay? Faith and works are not separate. They are respiration. They are inhale and exhale. One without the other is not possible. Respiration, that is faith and works. It's very likely that the great argument in the early church was also kind of the continuing argument that we have now. Is it our faith that saves us, or is it our good deeds that saves us? Well, guess what? It's not either or, it's both and. It's the same coin, just one side or the other. It is respiration. It is a part of a single dynamic whole. You cannot have one legitimately without the other. Our works are an expression of our faith, and our faith calls forth the works that we do. But there's more being said in James. James is a book essentially of wisdom. Now we heard that reading this morning from the Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom literature in Scripture is not just talking about good sayings. It's not just Proverbs in the Old Testament and James in the New. It's not just a collection of things that you ought to do. Far more than that, it is practical insight into how we are guided and encouraged by the Holy Spirit to respond to one another and to the world. James recognizes that we regularly fall short, that in fact we fail. James is about obstacles to grace. John gave us the power of grace. James tells us, well, these are the obstacles to it. And guess what? We are the cause of all of them. We are the ones that build up barriers to God being present and acting in our lives. And it's interesting, the most powerful tool that we use to do that. It's not the sword. Rather, it's the tongue. It's how we express ourselves. Anybody in here been wrongly accused of something? Anybody in here been bullied? Anybody in here ever had someone say something offensive to them? My goodness. You see, words are the source of all those other things. It's how we express that internal feeling of pushing someone aside or demeaning someone or lessening someone, or for that matter, building ourselves up. Words, the power of the tongue. Actually, it's an interesting word that James uses. He uses fire. In the Greek, though, it's pure, which doesn't mean just a flame, okay? That's nothing. No, it also means a lightning strike. It means the devastation caused by an uncontrollable blaze. That Greek word, it's the root of the word pyre. All right? For all the folks out here from the south, bonfire. Okay? We're all familiar with a bonfire. Big, overwhelming. You feel the heat. You see the light. That's what words are. That's what words do. They burn uncontrollably, and it's almost impossible to take them back once you've said them. You might desperately wish that you had said something else. Anybody here, a parent, said something to your child that you instantly wished you had not said? Yeah. It's even possible for the kids that maybe y'all said something to your parents you instantly wish that you hadn't said. And I know that we as friends have said things to one another. We've said something that hurts. And then, rather than take it back, we might say something else. We started digging that hole and we don't know how to get out of it. So we just keep making it worse. Words are powerful, overwhelming things. Which brings us back to our saint, dear Father John. Now, you might have heard this story before, but it's actually based on something that occurred. Remember, he's not just offering confession, he is offering counsel and insight. A woman comes to him who is notorious in the community for the power of her words to offend and to tear down, to gossip, to undermine. We all know folks with that interesting gift. They can hurt so horribly with their words. She came to him not just for confession, but for solace. What could she do? She didn't understand this uncontrollable power her words seemed to have. So he said, I want you to do something. I want you to go home. I want you to bring your bed pillow back here to the church. And I want you to go up into the tower, the bell tower. And I want you to lean out the tower. And I want you to slash open the pillow and dump the feathers out. And watch where they go. And so she did that. She slashed it open. And from the highest point in the church, she watched the feathers as the wind caught them and scattered them into gutters and roofs and across gardens and into streets and blew them out of her sight across the countryside. She watched until they were all spread out by the four winds. And then she walked down back to Father John to the confessional. And he says, what did you see? And she described what she'd seen. Those feathers going in every possible direction. He said, those are your words. Those are your words. She said, what can I do? He said, it's really very simple. You need to go and gather up every single one of the feathers. She was devastated. She said, that's not possible. He said, you're right. The damage of your words is done. But you can make amends. You can seek to apologize. You can go and ask forgiveness. The choice is always yours. The best choice of all, of course, though, would not to have been to scatter them to start with. To not have taken them up to that high place and let the wind carry them. She came seeking not just forgiveness, but a way forward. A way to end that pain that she caused others, and that in causing to be in the lives of others actually came back on her as well. We build the obstacles. There's no question. There is no doubt. We're the ones who build up the obstacles to God's grace. The good news that James proclaims, that John has already told us though, is that no matter how high we build the wall, no matter how thick or wide the barrier, no matter how widespread or far-flung the damage, God's grace, God's forgiveness, God's love can overcome it all. Amen.